Hello, everybody. So let me ask you a question first. So how many of you actually did grow up in a suburban neighborhood, single-family suburban neighborhood? Right, quite a few. Right, so you can leave now. And don't tell the rest of the truth, all right? So today, because I wanted to talk about the suburban life in the US. And as you can see from my accent, I probably know very little about American suburban life. So the topic is the hidden regulation behind the street, but the unofficial title, and maybe a more lovely title is why do we use a garage for storage? And this case is an extreme case, right? But I think the Americans' love affair with the garage is real and prevalent. Okay? And the research indicate in a suburban neighborhood, residents typically use at most up to 50% of their garage space, and the rest actually for storage. Okay? So I mean, when I was looking at this picture, I was wondering, the very natural question is, where are the cars, right? Where are the cars? And of course, cars are outside. They cannot be inside. So they are on the side, on the driveway, right? And on the streets. And the suburban streets typically is very wide, right? It's pretty wide. And you can park a lot of cars on the streets. And in this particular case, and these particular residents actually own 48 cars. 48 cars. And most of them are parked on the neighborhood streets across the whole neighborhood. Okay? So then my question, I become very curious. So I wanted to know why so wide neighborhood streets, right? Residential streets. You don't need to go 30, you don't need to go 60 miles per hour, right? This is purely residential neighborhood. 20, 25 miles is fairly enough. So I did my own investigation. I found out. So it's not the preference by the residents. It's not the preference by the developer. It's actually a requirement. You have to do this. Right? This is called the minimum width requirement. Right? So street width is heavily regulated in the US across all the local governments. Right? So the most typical case is you have a 36 feet wide streets from curb to curb and includes 2 traffic lanes and 2 parking lanes. Right? 2 parking lanes. So it's pretty wide. But I'm very curious, so why? Right, why? Because the garage is very spacious already, and driveway is big. You can park 5 cars on average on those space, and typically a household has only 2 cars. So why do we still provide the parking lanes on both sides? And I asked around my students and friends, and did you grow up in a suburban neighborhood? And how did you, what's the reason? And the most typical answer I got is parties, family gathering, weddings, right? So I was thinking, that's not the traffic engineer. By the way, this standard is defined by traffic engineer. That's not the typical traffic engineer I know. So they are not so sensitive and romantic. And they are romantic. They are not so romantic, right? So, and so I wanted to know why. So I asked them directly. I did a survey across the whole country, 97 different local governments, right? And asking them this specific question, why do you want to have the minimum width? Why do you regulate the street width, right? And I got 2 answers, basically. The first one is demand, right? People have to park on streets. And the demand is fixed, and we have to deal with that. So that's one. And the second one is safety. Given people have to park on streets, you need to have 2 traffic lanes, and those 2 traffic lanes cannot be interrupted by parked cars. They should be continuous alignment for 2 traffic lanes. So you put the 2 together, you got these wide residential streets. But I'm not 100% convinced. Because I doubt the wider street is actually safer. I mean, the second reason, right? So I invested further, and I found out that actually wider street is not safe at all. It's actually the opposite, right? because wide residential streets in the neighborhood encourage speeding, and speeding is one of the most dangerous threat to people's safety in that neighborhood. It's actually more dangerous than the highway based on the poor mileage you drive, right? So, and later on, I realized not only myself, the traffic engineers, they do not believe themselves too. And they have this double standard between private and public neighborhoods. By private, I mean their streets are owned and maintained by the homeowner association, right? Public, I mean they are owned and maintained by the local government, right? This is a neighborhood in Las Vegas. You can see the difference between the two neighborhoods. One is pretty wide, the other one is pretty narrow. And the wide one is a public neighborhood. Public means they own and maintain the public streets. And the narrow one is the private neighborhood, right? And Las Vegas is not alone. If you go to California, the great state of California, the whole state require for all the public streets, you need to have 40 feet wide, right? But for the private neighborhood, and 20 feet is fairly enough. So if narrow streets is dangerous, so they will never let this happen, right? So they don't believe themselves, right? I think the safety argument is not true, it's a false argument. What about the demand? So when we talk about the demand for a product, you need to think about the price, right? Without the price, how could you estimate the demand? So in a parking case, there's no price, right? And whenever you park on the residential neighborhood streets, you don't pay anything, right? You don't pay anything, even in New York. So those price of parking lane are actually embedded in your housing price, right? You pay through your housing property, housing price, housing value, but not through a separate account for parking lanes. So then my question is, if we separate the cost of providing the parking lane from housing, and are people willing to pay for the parking lanes, right? So I did a survey nationwide, 300 residents from those 97 local municipalities, and I found out actually the majority of them, 77 to 89% of them, are not willing to pay, or you can say they are willing to forego the parking lane in front of their house for cheaper housing, right? So, and with all the information, I think the answer to the question is clear, right? Why do we use garage for storage? It's because all these regulations, they actually oversupply parking space, but undersupply housing space, right? So, and people convert their garage into a living space, quote unquote garage, storage, because it's a self-correction of the excessive government regulation. Okay? So behind the garage with all the junks, there's actually a big transportation policy, right? And I think that the policy is a street standard. It become a de facto parking policy. And it's very influential because it can provide more than 400 million parking space on residential streets and heavily subsidize the car ownership, right? Think about the 48 cars owned by the California residents, right? And contribute to the 250 million automobiles in the US, and also reduce the housing affordability because 5% of the subdivision land are used for that parking lane. Without that, you can actually build more housing units, right? And altogether, the investment, the capital investment into those construction of parking lane could be totaled by 500 billion US dollars over many years for the whole country, not to mention all the maintenance cost. So it's a huge policy. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is it's actually nowhere to be seen, right? How many times you hear all the debate on the street width regulation? It's zero, right? It's zero. So where is this policy? This policy is actually embedded in this technical manual, right? Very technical manual with all those numbers, equations. It's not in text. It's actually in graph, as you see on the right part of the right figure. It's in graph. It's not in word. It's not in text. And this design manual should be adopted by the local legislation, right? Sometime by the majority vote. But if you check all the record, there's no discussion at all, right? So engineers become a very effective policy maker, and there's no discussion at all. It's become a very much a hidden policy. So, and the danger of this hidden policy, in general, I wanted to cite Susan Mettler, a professor from Cornell, regarding, she wrote this book, Submerged State. So you can read these comments. I think it's applied exactly to this particular case, right? It's become a hidden policy. Make people unaware of how power operates, unable to form meaningful opinions, and incapable of voicing their view accordingly, right? So I think that's the research I'm working on right now. And the message to you, I think is, in the future, you will work on many different policy issues and deal with many policy makers. Many of them are very visible, right? But some of them are not that visible, but could be equally influential, right? Equally influential. So while you study at Wagner or in other policy schools, I hope you can keep your eyes open and sharpen your vision, right? Thank you very much.